Imagine ruling the most powerful city in the world, while secretly realizing you've already lost. Cleopatra's last days were not filled with chaos, they were filled with waiting. Waiting for news, waiting for betrayal, waiting for Rome to arrive. Behind palace doors, she wasn't just planning survival, she was trying to control something far more dangerous. The story history would tell about her. What she did next would turn her final chapter into one of the most haunting mysteries ever recorded. If you enjoyed these dark histories, leave a like and subscribe. Comment below where you are watching from. I'm genuinely curious to know where this story reached. Cleopatra's final days were far more horrific than history admits. History rarely ends with a single dramatic moment. More often, it fades slowly, quietly reshaping itself while the people inside it continue moving as if nothing has changed. And in the final days of Cleopatra's reign, Alexandria existed inside that strange pause between what had been and what was about to become, where music still echoed through palace halls and the harbor still welcomed ships. Yet beneath the surface, something invisible was shifting, something inevitable. And Cleopatra, more perceptive than many rulers of her time, sensed it long before others allowed themselves to admit it. The palace did not suddenly fall into chaos, but instead transformed gradually. Voices lowering in corridors, servants exchanging glances that lasted just a second too long, advisors arriving late at night carrying scrolls sealed with unfamiliar insignias. And outside the palace walls, the city continued its daily rhythm while rumors moved through markets like drifting smoke, whispers of Rome, whispers of alliances dissolving, whispers of a future no one could clearly see, but everyone could feel approaching. Cleopatra understood that power was never permanent, that admiration could quickly become judgment, and that history itself was something shaped as much by storytelling as by events. So during these final days, she focused not only on survival, but on memory, summoning scholars, reorganizing archives, ensuring that symbols of Egypt's identity surrounded her, as if constructing a narrative environment designed to outlive political defeat, because she knew that long after armies moved on, stories would remain, and whoever shaped those stories would shape her legacy. Witnesses describe her moving through palace gardens with calm precision, fountains continuing to flow, and perfumed air masking the tension that lay beneath every interaction. Musicians still playing soft melodies while courtiers performed normalcy, as if rehearsing a role in a play whose ending everyone secretly knew. And yet Cleopatra maintained composure, understanding that appearances held power even when certainty vanished. Nights became longer, lamps burning late as she studied maps and reread letters, rewriting messages with careful phrasing, weighing each word against an uncertain future. And in the silence of empty corridors, her footsteps echoed as though the palace itself was aware of the approaching transformation. Outside, Alexandria felt suspended between realities, merchants continuing their trade yet storing goods more cautiously, families gathering closer together, conversations ending abruptly whenever unfamiliar ears approached, and the city's energy shifting from vibrant confidence into watchful stillness. Waiting defined these days more than any single event, and waiting can be more unsettling than confrontation, because it allows the imagination to wander through countless possibilities, each one heavier than the last. And Cleopatra's advisors debated outcomes, some urging negotiation while others insisted on resistance. Yet every discussion carried the unspoken knowledge that control was slipping away. Historical records from this period contradict one another, some portraying her as desperate, while others describe a ruler intensely focused and composed, and perhaps the truth lies somewhere between, a complex mixture of determination and reflection, as she navigated a world where every decision would be interpreted by future generations through lenses she could not control. The palace atmosphere grew dreamlike, torches flickering against stone walls that seemed to stretch endlessly, voices murmuring behind closed doors, the rhythm of daily life continuing but softened, as though the entire environment existed beneath a veil. Cleopatra began appearing less frequently in public spaces, communicating through trusted intermediaries while spending more time within private chambers, filled with symbolic objects, artifacts that connected her to Egypt's long history, reinforcing identity at a moment when identity felt fragile. Historians speculate that her greatest fear was not defeat itself, but the narrative that would follow. The possibility that Rome would reshape her into a caricature, stripping away complexity and reducing her life to a single story convenient for victors. And so she invested in symbols that suggested resilience, intelligence, and mystery, leaving behind clues rather than explanations. Days passed without clear resolution, the horizon of possibility narrowing slowly until the future felt predetermined. And when the future feels predetermined, people often retreat into quiet rituals, small routines that offer a sense of control. And Cleopatra walked through the palace, observing details others might overlook, the texture of carved columns, the way sunlight reflected against marble floors, the sound of distant waves from the harbor, committing these sensations to memory as if preserving fragments of a world already fading. Observers later describe her demeanor during these moments as contemplative rather than defeated, a shift from outward performance toward inward reflection, suggesting that she was preparing not for a single event but for the transformation of identity itself, from living ruler to historical figure. Alexandria mirrored this internal transformation, streets appearing unchanged yet feeling different, laughter quieter, celebration shorter, conversations layered with meanings left unspoken, and throughout it all the presence of Rome lingered like a shadow just beyond sight. The eerie nature of these final days lies not in dramatic spectacle, but in uncertainty, in the absence of definitive answers, because history leaves us with fragments instead of clarity, scattered accounts that hint at emotional landscapes without revealing them fully, and within that ambiguity lies something haunting, the realization that even the most powerful individuals can experience moments where control dissolves into waiting. Cleopatra's final preparations may have included carefully staged environments, meant to influence how visitors perceived her, reinforcing the image of a ruler aligned with divine heritage and intellectual strength. Yet beneath these performances likely existed private moments of doubt, reflections shared only with the silence of empty rooms. As time moved forward, the palace grew quieter, and those who walked its halls sensed that something significant was approaching, even if they could not define it, creating an atmosphere where every sound felt amplified, and every gesture carried weight beyond its immediate meaning. Cleopatra continued meeting envoys, considering possibilities that grew narrower with each passing day, balancing hope against realism while understanding that legacy might become her final form of influence. One account suggests that she spent hours examining artworks depicting earlier Egyptian rulers, perhaps drawing strength from continuity, perhaps reminding herself that history moves in cycles and that even endings become beginnings for new narratives. The slow progression of these days created a tension, unlike sudden conflict, a lingering suspense that stretched across conversations, meals, and quiet walks through the palace gardens. And this suspense is what makes her story unsettling, not because of overt tragedy, but because of the psychological weight carried within each moment. Imagine standing at the center of a world you built while sensing that its structure is shifting beyond your ability to stop it, surrounded by beauty yet aware of impermanence, holding conversations while silently calculating outcomes, smiling for appearances while measuring risks internally, and understanding that every observer may later reinterpret your actions according to their own agenda. In her final phase, Cleopatra's focus appeared to shift toward internal clarity, accepting that control over events might be limited, but control over meaning remained possible, and meaning can outlast circumstance. She walked through rooms illuminated by fading sunlight, pausing near windows overlooking the sea, listening to distant sounds that blended into a single memory, and perhaps in those moments she was not thinking about defeat or victory, but about continuity, about how stories survive long after individuals disappear from the stage. The haunting aspect of Cleopatra's final days is the quietness with which they unfolded, the absence of dramatic noise replaced by a slow tightening of possibility, a narrowing path that transformed uncertainty into inevitability without ever fully revealing its emotional depth to observers. History later simplified these days into familiar myths, romanticized narratives that overlooked the complexity of waiting, reflection, and psychological endurance. Yet when we look closer, we find a ruler navigating an invisible countdown, shaping symbols and memories while the world around her shifted beyond recognition. Alexandria eventually moved forward as all cities do, absorbing change and continuing its rhythm, but within those final days existed a moment suspended in time, where past and future overlapped. And Cleopatra stood at the center of that overlap, aware that she was living inside the final chapter of a story that would be retold for centuries. And perhaps the most unsettling truth is that we will never fully know what she felt during those quiet hours, only that she faced them with a calm that may have masked countless thoughts, leaving behind a legacy defined not only by legend, but by the eerie silence of uncertainty that surrounded her until the very end.